I think this is the political hill to die on. This is all of our rights fundamentally come from free speech. This is what separates us from the authoritarian regimes in Russia or in China or Venezuela or any other dictatorship type nation around the world. And if we don't take a stand here, this is going to take effect everywhere else. Is what happens in the UK, it reverberates around the world. We have to stand and fight for this. And the fact that so many people who've been traditional free speech advocates have been quiet in this. I'm sure, Toby, you're looking at people that you've known for years and saying, get off the sidelines. What are you doing? We don't take this stand now, we're going to cease to exist as a true democratic society.
For the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by.
Hello, Gettr friends. This is an exclusive Gettr live stream about the online safety bill, and I'm very privileged to be joined by the Gettr CEO, Jason Miller, the lovely Dominique Samuels, Chairman Hal of the Reclaim Party, and Toby Young from the Free Speech Union. So we're going to talk about the online safety bill. What is it? Where did it come from, and what effect it's going to have on free speech? And because I'm thick, I'm going to let Toby from the Free Speech Union tell us what the online safety bill is. Tobes.
So, Laurence, it began life as the Online Harms White Paper, which was unveiled by Sajid Javid when he was Home Secretary in 2019 under Theresa May. And he boasted, when unveiling this plan to regulate the internet, that it would make Britain the safest place in the world to go online, which is code for the most regulated place in the world if you want to set up an internet company, which doesn't sit very well with a kind of vision of Britain's post-Brexit future as being less strangled by red tape than we used to be. But anyway, putting that aside, they've now rebranded it, not the Online Harms Bill, but the Online Safety Bill, because as I'm sure you are more than familiar, it is in the name of safety that our liberties are constantly being eroded, and this is no exception. So one of the things the bill will do is introduce a new harmful communications offence. It'll replace some of the existing communications offences in England and Wales, but not in Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's a layer of complexity. It will mean that you can be prosecuted and, if found guilty, spend up to 2 years in jail if you're guilty of sending a communication, i.e. tweeting something, putting something on Facebook, which causes someone psychological harm, described as extreme distress. Now, there's no clinical test.
Very specific.
It sounds very subjective, and my worry is that this will be a Trojan horse to smuggle subjective definitions of harm into the criminal justice system. Now so internet companies will be tasked by Ofcom, search engines, big tech, platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, with removing unlawful content under this new harmful communications offence definition of what is harmful. But in addition, and this is where it gets really sinister, Nadine Dorries is going to pass a statutory instrument, a secondary piece of legislation after the Online Harms Bill has been passed, identifying priority content that social media platforms will be under an obligation to remove with particular priority. And if they fail to do that, this is one of the sinister and worrying things about the bill, Ofcom will have the power to fine social media companies, search engines, up to 10% of their annual global turnover. I don't know what was in your case, Jason, but in the case of Facebook, that's over $10 billion if they get it wrong. And in this statutory instrument, Nadine Dorries is planning to identify what's notoriously become known as legal but harmful content. So content, I mean, it's one thing wanting to prohibit content that's lawful but harmful to children, such as websites encouraging children to self-harm, become anorexic, commit suicide, and so forth. That I think none of us have got a problem with that. But they also want to remove legal but harmful content that's harmful to adults. And already it's been suggested by Nadine Dorries herself that this will include harassment. And we all know that harassment can be very, very, very broadly defined by political activists to shut down any speech they find even remotely disagreeable. But it's likely it'll also include hate speech and misinformation. And as we know, the big tech companies described anyone speculating about the COVID-19 originating in the Wuhan Institute of Virology as misinformation. We're not so sure that is misinformation now. But in addition, hate speech is an incredibly broad category which can easily be weaponized by political activists.
Would calling it flu be hate speech?
Probably would, yeah. You'd probably get banned from Twitter under this new legislation for that, yes. Yeah, your future on social media does not look bright if the online safety bill becomes law.
My future on social media is not looking bright at the moment. My present on
just to finish, just on, it may be that you don't think Nadine Dorries will be too censorious when it comes to identifying legal but harmful to adults content in the statutory instrument that's passed after this bill. But the real hostage to fortune in this bill is that future Secretaries of State at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport will also have the opportunity to bring forward statutory instruments and identify priority harms that these social media companies have to remove on pain of being fined 10% of their annual global turnover. And even if you trust Nadine, and I'm not sure I do, I certainly don't trust Chris Bryant or Dawn Butler, if they are future Secretaries of State at DCMS, to get this right, not use it, not weaponise it for their own political purposes.
Well, maybe we'll get Zara Sultana instead. I trust her.
Please.
What do you think, Dominique? What do you think about it?
I think it's absolutely terrifying, and I think it's against a backdrop of increasing government interference and encroachment. I mean, we saw that during the pandemic, where the government was allowed to have unprecedented levels of control over our daily lives. And now there's this, which seeks to prevent grown adults from being exposed to legal but harmful information. And I think this is the difficulty. Who gets to decide what is harmful? Who gets to decide what is deliberately offensive? It's purely based on someone's subjective opinion. So what that is going to lead to, it's going to lead to some opinions being deemed appropriate and some opinions being deemed harmful. And this is a concern, I think, across the political spectrum. It's not just something that's on the right. I mean, even Joanna Cherry, MP for the SNP, she said that there is a concern when it comes to freedom of speech as well, because, for example, when feminist campaigners are talking about, the existence of biological sex, they're also shut down by, rabid trans activists on the far left as well. So it's not just a right versus left issue. I think this really is about freedom and civil society, and it's completely shocking that a supposed Conservative government would propose this, and I think it's more so they can be seen to be actually doing something rather than serving the best interests of the people, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's and as you say, the subjective element of it is really dangerous. It's the who can shout loudest and be most offended bill. Exactly. Almost. It's like no good. You're the CEO of Gettr. What's it going to do to Gettr?
Well, this is mortifying what it could do, not just in the UK, but around the world. We're also seeing the Digital Services Act in the EU, which will take effect this next January, where it could even go potentially a step further. But I think both Dominique and Toby hit the nail on the head when they said it all comes down to this legal but harmful. Who is deciding this? Because it's not going to stop. It's just the political issue of the day. Let's take it a step further and say, how is this going to impact talk about religion? What happens then if somebody believes that there are two genders? And if you don't embrace the fact that there are 47 or 75 additional genders, 73, sorry. Are you then being hateful? What about if you want to have a conversation?
You were just hateful. You said there were 75 and there were 73.
So clearly I hated on somebody just now.
Misinformation. You need taken down.
Think about debates over things such as the grooming gangs. Think about debates over just anything legal but harmful. And here's the real problem. What this is about is control. Because by going and put it in the hands of the government, not as far as the private companies or even say to go through and to go and regulate their own platforms, but to have the government do it, there's no way to remove inherent political bias from a government appointee. That means someone with a very pointed political point of view, they're in government, everyone has a political point of view if you're in government, is making the decisions. I don't think George Orwell was wrong at all. I think he was just off by a couple decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Chairman Hal?
Yeah, I think this idea of legal but harmful is shorthand for illegal, because that's the way it goes. If something is legal but harmful, and if you can prove that something is harmful, in effect it becomes illegal. That's entirely wrong. This is Orwellian doublespeak. Okay, it's Orwellian doublespeak, and it's an absolute assault on free speech. And in my ruling at the High Court, Mr. Justice Knowles, he began, I think, with Orwell. He then moved on to J.S. Mill, and then he finished with references to the Gestapo, the Stasi, and the Checker, the three most horrific police forces in Europe of our recent past. And unfortunately, everything that I see suggests that the police are going that way. When Mr. Knowles wrote that in his ruling, I don't think he did it because he wished to create a headline or to be hyperbolic. I think he did it because he saw the clear direction of travel, that the police, that the government, or if not the government, then agencies acting on behalf of the government, such as the College of Policing, such as the people who wrote the Equal Treatment Bench book, for instance, Laurence. We have a situation where law has become secondary to guidance, and the guidance is being written outside of Parliament by people with a clear ideological and political agenda, and it's rendering law almost irrelevant.
Yeah, and there's actually a mechanism built into the Online Safety Bill which effectively is a gold embossed invitation to political activists claiming to represent and speak on behalf of disadvantaged minorities to actually change the guidance. So when the Secretary of State is considering what priority harms to list in the legal but harmful section of the statutory instrument, and this isn't just going to be one statutory instrument, this is going to be a series of ongoing, in perpetuity, statutory instruments. They're in the bill it says they have to take into account what people have complained about. So if something isn't identified as a priority harm because it's legal but harmful to adults in the statutory instrument initially, activist groups will be able to complain both to Ofcom and to social media companies, and they will base future considerations of what should be in the statutory instrument and prohibited on these complaints. So it's a gold embossed invitation. And what to your point, Jason, when a new statutory instrument is introduced, identifying a new set of priority harms of stuff which is legal but harmful to adults, the previous one won't be scrapped. So there's a ratchet effect. It's going to grow and grow and grow till there'll be virtually nothing we can say which someone somewhere doesn't consider harmful, and for that reason is prohibited.
Well, and of course, what we see then implemented in the UK or even in the EU is then going to impact the rest of the world, because the social media companies, Gettr itself included, if they want to continue to do business in that market, they'll be forced to make certain adjustments and changes. Certain countries have different abilities to go and challenge things in the courts. The United States, I'm very confident that something like this would never pass. I think the First Amendment is too strong, despite the best efforts of Biden and Nina Jankowicz, who's no longer with us. In a figurative sense, she's still alive. But what we see happening with the EU and the UK will affect free speech then around the world.
You talked about the European legislation coming in, but Toby made quite an interesting point this morning when I was listening to him having a row with Delingpole about the fact that this is a very English-speaking phenomenon. What's happening? You know, it's the English, the Anglosphere, whatever we're meant to call it. Why do you think it's particularly affecting our language, the English language?
Why is the assault on free speech more advanced in the Anglosphere?
That was the question
than
I was
elsewhere.
going to ask. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think it is broadly true. I don't think things are quite as bad
In Gambia.
in continental Europe, at least not yet. Certainly not in Africa, in South America, and seemingly countries with a Catholic heritage have slightly more antibodies to kind of the woke virus than people in Protestant countries with a Protestant heritage. And why is that? Maybe because it kind of strikes a chord with that kind of puritanical streak that's still running through our cultures in the English-speaking world. It may be because the main instrument for disseminating this cult is social media, and the first language of social media is English. So of course it's going to take more root in English-speaking countries. Nothing's going to get lost in translation. But we're trying to set up branches of the Free Speech Union, not just here, but across the Anglosphere. And there is one in New Zealand, there's one in the US. We're hoping to open one soon in Australia and South Africa, and then Canada and New Zealand, because this is the battlefront.
I think it's also more to do with the prevalence of liberalism in Western society and English-speaking countries, because with liberalism as an ideology, it constantly seeks self-improvement. So the end project, which is of an ideal government, an ideal society, it never can quite be achieved, which is why liberal democracies encourage freedom of speech and encourage that free discussion. But what has happened is, because we're constantly trying to find sort of the perfect ideal of society, it's led to us then becoming extremely illiberal by trying to cast out the individuals that we believe go against those sort of liberal ideals and values. So, for example, tolerance. You need to be tolerant to everyone and everything. And if you have an opposing view to, say, for example, Islamic culture and some of the more intolerant aspects of that, you must be shunned from society because that's not liberal. And I think in that sense, perhaps that's sort of part of the inherent contradiction, I think, in a lot of English-speaking countries, because we stress freedom and liberalism so much. It's made it so that we've almost gone back on ourselves and we're almost regressing rather than actually progressing.
Is that because we're spoiled?
Yeah.
And that we've become so... No one is... I mean, obviously people suffer and they suffer every day on an individual level, but we haven't had a catastrophic situation that's come across us, that we're now fragile, and this idea of safety and harm and hate, and that people just think people can't deal with it, cope with it, Harry.
No, I think we need to reclaim, we need to normalise being offensive. No, I think we do. I think we need to normalise being offensive. We need to normalise it so that it's not seen as simply the thing that is done by rabid extremists, but it's a part and parcel of life. Being offensive should be normal. I mean, everybody needs to go off to a football match. It's a football match. Whoever you are, you all sing "We All Hate Leeds Scum." Everybody does that. That is normal offensive behaviour. You get a bunch of guys down the pub, they greet each other with insults. That's the way you do it. Hey up, yo, wanker. Boom. That's it. That's the way we do it. We need to normalise. Yeah. Boom. Yeah. Seriously, we need to normalise. For instance, I mean, I got into some trouble a year or so ago by using the hashtag #SayYesToHate. Now, what I wasn't doing, I wasn't trying to encourage people to go out and start beating up and sending malicious communications to members of the 5 monitored strands or various other protected characteristics. What I was saying is that hate is an everyday human emotion like love, jealousy, envy. And unless and until it leads to criminal action, it is no business whatsoever of the police. The police are not the policers of emotions. They are the police. They should be there to police the law, to look for a guilty mind coupled with a guilty action, mens rea plus actus reus minus a defence, and prosecute that. But unfortunately, they've stepped outside the boundaries and they're now trying to police our emotions to the extent that in the Wirral just earlier this year, Merseyside police took a billboard around Tesco's, I think it was, a massive 10-foot billboard that said, being offensive is an offence. Well, it isn't. It's not an offence, and it's never been an offence. So don't do it. But this is what happens when we allow the police to limit our speech. So my reaction is #SayYesToHate, #BeOffensive, #let's reclaim the richness of the English language, which has all kinds of insults in it.
I agree. Tobes, is there are we not just losing this idea of what hate is? I mean, I totally agree with what everyone is saying, particularly what Dominique is saying about the fact that we're going backwards. But are we losing other things as well, which are actually even more dangerous, like context and chronology and other ththings in terms of how arguments are formed?
Yeah.
Because, you know, that is the thing that really bothers me. When you string a sentence together in the English language, social media is obviously different, but it's very rich. I mean, it's rich in any language, I'm sure, but English is the only way I can speak really bad French. But are we losing those really core aspects of communication through this as well?
Well, it's not clear whether we're losing them or whether they're being deliberately ignored for kind of political purposes. I mean, we saw this yesterday on Twitter. So Julia Hartley-Brewer got into trouble for saying that she had, from time to time in the past, laughed at rape jokes. And that was immediately interpreted by a kind of woke outrage mob calling for her head as Julia Hartley-Brewer thinking that rape is funny. Whereas those aren't the same thing. I mean, you can say, I find a particular rape joke funny, and that would depend on the joke and depend on the comedian telling it and depend on the context. And it's perfectly possible that you might find a particular rape joke funny. You might inadvertently even laugh at a rape joke. That doesn't mean you think rape itself is funny, but people were interpreting it in the least charitable way and deliberately decontextualizing it and ignoring any nuance or any subtlety so they could then perform their outrage. And we see that again and again.
Is that, do you think social media is to blame for that, Jason? The fact that people don't have enough characters? I mean, you get many more on Gettr. Thank you, Gettr.
777. Yeah, loads more.
But, you know, the idea that people are trying to pack so much into such a short post that they that people can't, they just will leap on the word. Do you think social media is responsible for this at all?
I don't think so. I think it's more of an issue of society, as you correctly point out earlier, becoming weak. But I really think the greatest threat to Western civilization is identity politics. Everything now is about rewarding someone for a characteristic that they have or they might identify with. It's not about rewarding them for who they are as a person, what they've accomplished, what they've given back to their community. Everyone wants to be special just to have it handed to them as opposed to actually going out and earning it. And so we see this identity politics then all of a sudden take over academia, then it takes over the mainstream media, then it takes over social media. But when we talk, and you make a great point about just the issue of comedy. Bill Maher had in his, it was in his panel discussion a couple of weeks ago, he brought up the point about how many jokes have died on the cutting room floor over the last couple of years because of woke culture, which, by the way, I'm sorry, worst ever American export. So I got to apologize for wokeism being sent around. So I'm trying to...
We've got Black Bloc now.
But the one thing I'd say is, the concern, though, is it starts with a small thing about who feels comfortable, who feels uncomfortable. But what this ultimately is about eliminating legal dissent. That's the framework of democracy, of our Western civilization, that you can legally dissent. Think about it. Would Boris have changed up his position on masks and travel if he wasn't being criticized? No, of course. People criticize him. He folded and changed some of that. Now we're going to get some other negative things. But you look at all the policies that Dr. Anthony Fauci put into place in the United States. He was criticized. He changed his position. That's what democracy is, but they're taking that away so you can no longer dissent legally. That's what this is getting at.
That's absolutely critical to it, I think. I mean, it's people on, for the most part, the liberal left, defining their point of view as rooted in science, rooted in the facts. And anyone who disagrees with them doesn't disagree with them because there's a fundamental conflict of values between people holding two different sets of political beliefs. They're right, and if you disagree with them, you're either a purveyor of hate speech or misinformation. It's as though there's a reluctance to engage in the kind of meat of proper political, philosophical debate, and this pretense that their point of view is uncontroversial, it's just guided by the facts, it's just straightforward, wholesome information. And if you disagree with them, it's not because you fundamentally have any philosophical differences, it's because you've been taken in and hoodwinked by liars and conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, it's almost as if the Washington Post or New York Times fact checkers being the ones who are saying what you can and can't post to social media. If you agree with them, it's great. If you disagree with them,
it's a form of rhetoric, essentially.
But what seems odd to me about it is that there are some words that we're told exactly what to believe in, that like diversity, equity and inclusion and stuff like that. We're told exactly what those mean, but other words, for some reason, mean something else. What did I want to ask you, Dominique? Steelman it. Tell me what the good reason for this online safety bill is. Give me a why it's great.
I suppose the good thing about it is that initially it does seek to tackle things that disproportionately impact the vulnerable online. Toby mentioned it before, that being children given instructions on how to self-harm. And at the end of the day, when you are harassed online, threatened violently or whatever, it's obviously a bad thing, but the difficulty with this is a lot of the things that the online safety bill talks about is already illegal, And B, there is really no need for further legislation, because on its own, protecting children from things that are harmful on the internet, I think everybody will be able to agree with that. But then when you start moving on to forcing social media companies to censor what people can and can't say, that's when you get into really difficult territory. So yeah, I do find it hard to defend it, to be honest.
There is a kind of free speech case for the online safety bill, which Nadine Dorries has made on numerous occasions, and that would be. I mean, I think Dominique makes the main point that there's a lot of concern out there about the harmful impact of social media, particularly on children, and a kind of public desire to do something about it, a political will to do something about it. But I think there's Nadine Dorries says this will actually strengthen free speech in three ways. First of all, search engines, social media companies will have to pay particular attention to content of democratic importance. If something is judged to be of democratic importance, it'll enjoy special protections and be more difficult to remove than it is at present. In addition, journalistic content will enjoy that same protection. And when making a decision about what content to remove, social media companies, search engines will have to have regard for free speech. Well, let's take those various protections in turn, because they're not nearly as robust as they might at first appear.
Sounds like propaganda. Watching propaganda to me. It's like government collusion.
First of all, content of democratic importance is defined in the bill as political debates about the contemporary issues in the UK and parts of the UK. So what that means is that commenting on partisan political debates that are ongoing, bills going through Parliament, like the discussion we're having now, they would be protected. But anything in the kind of broader culture wars arena, anything political with a small p, that wouldn't enjoy the protection of content of democratic importance. So it wouldn't stop, it wouldn't stop Twitter banning gender-critical feminists for saying, a woman is an adult human female. That wouldn't be considered content of democratic importance.
We'll cut it.
73. Journalistic content. The concern there is, well, who gets to define what is journalistic content? Is Ofcom going to keep a register of journalism, of news publishers, and you have to be on the register in order to enjoy this special protection because what you produce will be journalistic content. Now, Ofcom are saying, no, we're not going to produce a register, provided you have a complaints policy, provided there is a sort of right of reply, then we will recognise you as a respectable news publisher and extend this protection to you and expect social media companies to do the same. But it will only take the slightest tweak from an incoming Labour government to essentially introduce state regulation of the press via the back door by creating a register, by saying unless you're regulated by this state regulator, Impress or whomever, then you won't be entitled to this protection. Finally, the have regard for free speech protection. In the hierarchy of legal duties, have regard is the very weakest of all of them. It's like bottom of League Two, whereas the duty to protect users from harm, that's top of the Premier League. So, when these two duties come into conflict, don't expect Scunthorpe to prevail over Manchester City.
Absolutely. Harry, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the problem is that we are being led down a road by government and government institutions to learn how to, not only about what we say, but to learn how to think. I was looking at the Equal Treatment Bench book just today, for instance. And this is the Bench book, which is the Bible of the judiciary. The judiciary are supposed to pay high regard to this book. And in it, under just one second, under the section about gender, there are 79 paragraphs, 78 of which are devoted to lecturing us about trans rights, telling us what gender fluid is, what agender is, what non-binary is. And the Bench book also recognises that these terms are politically contentious and yet seems to have no problem with them at all. Now, of the 79 paragraphs, there is one measly paragraph which recognises the Meyer Forstatter case and that recognises gender criticality as being a belief worthy of respect in a democratic society. But you can almost hear the writer hissing, in the same way. You almost expect them to come out with, Meyer Forstatter, this pillow-chewing player of the pink oboe. You must, I suppose, give some regard to this evil, horrible, gender-critical witch. I mean, it's almost It's almost that bad. One paragraph out of 79. We are being lectured non-stop about what to say, what terms to use, and thereby what to think. And here's another thing. If they can persuade us that merely by saying, I am a woman, when you are clearly a man, if they can get us to, well, none of us believe it, but if they can convince us to say it, then they own us.
It's half the thing. I couldn't agree with you more. This is another cracker from the Equal Treatment Bench book that defines what racism is, and this is judges are obliged to pay a lot of diligence. This guidance. Racism is a term defined more by effects/outcomes than by motives. A racist action or a person who acts in a racist way is not necessarily racially prejudiced. However, the term is often used to describe a combination of conscious or unconscious prejudice and power to implement action which leads, however unintentionally, to disproportionate disadvantage for BAME people. People who use the term racist to describe the actions of others may or may not mean that the other person is personally prejudiced, which
So they're not racist then?
Yeah, or
everybody's racist.
Or no words mean anything, is what I'm stuck here with. What I'm confusing me and really actually pisses me off to the nth degree is why do some words have very specific meanings and all of the nuanced words that wrap around, the adjectives, everything else that wrap around other words, suddenly mean nothing.
Well, that's in your case, Laurence. You know, the argument is that when somebody calls you a racist, it means nothing because the bench book says everybody's a racist.
Yeah,
isn't it? That's the problem. But if you call somebody another rude word, like paedophile, then that is very specific and
attractive person, really.
Yeah, so that's the problem. So we give an importance to words which are based on a political ideology.
But it's also respecting the person. This is the other thing. If we were truly wanted to keep people safe and stuff like that, it would seem to me is we would respect the intentions of the person we were speaking to, and we would put what they said to us into context. Do you not think, Dominique?
Yeah, I think that would be the sensible thing to do, but I don't necessarily think it's about that, to be honest. It's not about giving people the benefit of the doubt anymore. It's about immediately going for the bad intention. They must have meant this in a horrible way, because therefore it makes people easier to control. And I think that's something that the left has done extremely effectively within our culture, because when it comes to leftism and leftist ideology anyway, simply having a difference of opinion, it can't, like you said, just be that you have different values. It has to be personal. It has to be that there is something intrinsically wrong with you, which is why you have the audacity to disagree with them. In a lot of ways, it's almost gaslighting. Even when you go back to sort of the pandemic, anyone that was critical of lockdowns, that was critical, of forced vaccines, there must be something intrinsically wrong with you, for you to disagree with me. And it's sort of a psychological exercise, I think, in a way. It convinces people that there's something mentally wrong with them, which in turn forces them internally not to speak. So this isn't necessarily about shutting people's speech down once they actually open their mouth. It's also about preventing them from opening their mouth in the first place for fear of offending people.
Is it an accident? Is it an accident of leftism, or is it deliberate? 100% deliberate. So you get little progressive steps as you make more and more difficult decisions in life. Is this planned and being thought through, the long march through the institutions? Is this all happened?
I mean, yeah, you could say it was planned. I think that when we get into that sort of territory, you know, there is the difficulty of being called, conspiracy theorists. But, I would say that over the years there has been a concerted effort by people on the liberal left to infiltrate our institutions, whether it be our universities, whether it be our media. Just look at broadcast journalism at the moment. There does seem to be one group of people singing from the same hymn sheet, and that hymn sheet is one particular worldview. And then these same people get surprised when alternative media platforms are built, when alternative voices start coming out in the media, and also when extremists are developed, your conspiracy theorists, your far-right racist. They get surprised when those people start coming out of the woodwork, because what happens is when you censor people and make people feel wrong internally for having a different opinion, you're inevitably going to get extremists, and that's how the breakdown of civil society ensues.
Is it dangerous? So does Gettr block people?
Of course, we have terms of service and we have our community guidelines. We obviously comply with the laws of the land. So if it's something that's threatening physical harm or doxing or ISIS beheading videos, things that legally or would be illegal,
it's common sense, really.
Of course we're going to. Obviously, there are areas where it becomes more of a gray area. For example, with Gettr, we do not allow racial or religious epithets. That's a decision that we've made, and some people will say, hey, that's maybe it's legal, but you should be able to go and say that. There are plenty of other platforms if you can't make it through a sentence without using a racial or religious epithet. That's what we decided as a community. We're not going to get it right every single time. Of course, as a growing platform, we'll make mistakes. We'll do our best to get it right. But every platform is going to have their terms of service and community guidelines, whether it be a Twitter, Facebook, a Gettr, Rumble, anything that's going to be out there. But again, the problem with the government coming through and doing it, and if we put all that power with them, when we look at the upcoming generations, in recent polling for, say, young people under 30, it's at 70% where they agree that you should be able to ban people permanently from social media. And so if this passes now in its current form, you're never going to get that back here in the UK, and it's going to spread, and as we see in the EU and the US.
Toby?
Is there one thing I don't understand is why social media platforms, and perhaps you do this, don't go in more for outsourcing content moderation. So saying to the adult users, if they can verify that they're adults, you get to decide, what sort of content you see. And if you're happy with seeing content that other people would regard as harmful, if you're happy seeing people using racial or religious epithets, then you can set your filter accordingly. Why isn't there more of that? Why aren't people being trusted to kind of judge for themselves what's harmful to them and what isn't?
It would help the FBI, wouldn't it? With this terrible shooting in Buffalo, this kid was saying stuff. You would sort of want to know what mad lunatic views.
Oh, I thought you meant help the FBI, because anyone who kind of set their filter to kind of like maximum permissiveness could then be investigated as a kind of potential.
No, but I obviously you don't want people killing people. You don't want some idiot psychopath planning. Sorry, I know it's turning into a sauna in here, so I apologise, and we'll get to final comments in a minute. But this guy left a footprint, didn't he, of what his feelings were, and then went and committed an atrocity. So the idea of seeming of getting rid of these people seems completely ridiculous, because you're driving someone out of the sun. The sunlight is the best disinfectant. You want to drag people into the sunlight, so that you can see what they may or may not be capable. So police forces can monitor appropriately or not appropriately.
That's another thing that the online safety bill is doing, actually. I read this just before. A number of security experts have come out and said that the online safety bill, I think it's clause 103(2)(b), actively threatens end-to-end encryption. So encrypted messages, the privacy of messages, it gives social media companies the ability to remove that to tackle terrorism. And that is another thing as well. Is the future of our private messages safe from these social media companies and governments? And how long will that be for? And I think it's a good point about wanting to prevent those sorts of things happening. But again, the government seems to be using these sorts of threats to justify more invasion of our privacy.
And if I just jump in, you bring up a great point. I'm glad you brought this up, because the fine print on there, they exclude emails. They say that you can't go through emails with the online safety bill. But to your point, the end-to-end encryption will effectively be wiped out. But they also said in the direct, say the video calls between two people, they're not supposed to be able to get into. But with group calls or group conversations, whether it's something like Twitter Spaces or something or Clubhouse or something of that nature, that they can then go and monitor that. And so the mission creep on this is really sinister. And here's the thing: when we look at governments that have been busted for spying and the collection of data, don't think that a lot more isn't going on that we're not aware of. And don't think that it's all being collected. Meanwhile, the CCP does it the old-fashioned way. They just launch TikTok and collect all your user data from age 12 or 13 and up, and so they'll know how your brain works better than you do by the time you're 18.
And that's the thing, can we really claim to even have the moral high ground anymore when we're doing things like this? It gives regimes in China, Iran, etc., it just gives them free rein. If you're doing this in your supposedly free societies, I can do whatever the hell I want because, well, you don't have the moral high ground anymore.
I think that's one of the really dangerous things about this bill. It sets a precedent. It enables much more oppressive authoritarian regimes to say, look, they're doing it in the UK, the birthplace of parliamentary democracy. If it's okay there, then of course it's okay here.
Right, that's really good points. Okay, final thoughts. Harry?
I think we have to be very careful, as following on from what Toby just said, because the entire world looks at what Britain does and follows it. They certainly do that in the policing system and in the legal system. One of the arguments that the College of Policing had for keeping the non-crime hate incident as lawful, they literally said, please don't take it off us because the whole of Europe follows our example. We've been doing it all these years and the whole of Europe follows. Well, that cannot possibly be a justification for having something which breaches our human rights. It can't. And that's why I think it's incredibly important that organisations like Reclaim, like the Free Speech Union, like Gettr, do what we do. Because we have a duty, we're here, we're now, we have a duty to hold the flag of free speech and maintain it, regardless of the odds, regardless of the pressure. I think the responsibility, for whatever reason, it's fallen to us, and I think we need to take it seriously.
Well said that, Tobes?
Well, I agree with Harry. You know, it's.
Do you want to come and work for us then?
Well, you join the Free Speech.
We can't afford him.
The Free Speech Union is a non-partisan organisation, so we can't.
We're a non-partisan political party.
We have to be quite careful about who we associate with in the political arena. But I completely agree with Harry. I think it has fallen to a kind of unlikely motley crew of ne'er-do-wells to kind of fight this incredibly important civilizational battle. And I'm happy to say that since I set up the Free Speech Union 2 years ago, we've now got over 9,000 members, 17 employees. We keep winning individual battles, but whether we're winning the war is another matter. I mean, it's like you find yourself fighting on so many fronts. There are so many assaults on free speech coming at you from every conceivable direction that you have to kind of pick your battles. And even if you win them, you're losing all these ones you're not engaging in. So it's an unbelievable generational struggle that we're involved in, and it's going to take, I think, 10, 15 years to try and put things right. But by God, we've got to try.
Agree. Well said that, man. Dominique?
I agree with everything that's been said. Just for me, particularly, I worry for my generation and the generation before me, because it seems that we've forgotten why free speech is important, and it seems that we've forgotten why your right not to be offended doesn't supersede my right to offend you. And I think we've placed feelings above common sense, above objectivity and above reality, and it's gotten to a point where governments that you'd traditionally refer to as conservative are also bowing to this worldview, not only bowing to it, but perpetuating it in an extremely aggressive way. And when you've got governments, on the left, I mean, something similar to the online safety bill has been done in Canada as well. When you've got a government on the left and then you've got a government that's supposedly on the right doing the same thing, that's when there's a problem. So I think overall we need to end the partisanship, and that's why I think the Free Speech Union is so important, because this isn't about left or right, it's about civil society and democracy, really.
Well said, thank you. And finally, before I say whatever I've got to say, a huge thank you for Jason for coming and for Gettr for hosting it. And I think it's great that we have different free speech platforms. Jason, what are your final thoughts?
I think this is the political hill to die on. This is all of our rights fundamentally come from free speech. This is what separates us from the authoritarian regimes in Russia or in China or Venezuela or any other dictatorship type nation around the world. And if we don't take a stand here, this is going to take effect everywhere else. Is what happens in the UK, it reverberates around the world. We have to stand and fight for this. And the fact that so many people who've been traditional free speech advocates have been quiet in this. I'm sure, Toby, you're looking at people that you've known for years and saying, get off the sidelines. What are you doing? We don't take this stand now, we're going to cease to exist as a true democratic society.
Yeah.
Oh man, well said that man. I'll finish with last night I was watching Platoon again because I had a difficult day in court. So
How many times have you seen it?
It's hundreds.
Okay.
But it's this great moment when they, because it's an anti-war movie essentially, and but it's a brilliant anti-war movie, and there's this great line in it. Where Sergeant Barnes, played by Tom Berenger, comes in and he goes, "None of you know anything about death. What do you know about death?" And then he leaves and he has a fight with Charlie Sheen, and then this guy goes, "The only guy that's going to kill Barnes is Barnes." And that's the same with free speech. It's like the only people that are going to get free speech back is us, the ones that fight for it. So thank you very much for joining us, and it's a bit like a sauna in here, so we're going to have a gin and a cigarette. Bye!